again, more of that mindset, having the mindset, exactly knowing what you are going to do if you ever are in that unfortunately dreadful situation of having to defend yourself. And probably the most important, good steps you can take to avoid confrontation and to avoid potential violent encounters.
You're listening to Talkin' to America with our guest, Tim Schmidt. Here once again is your host, Aaron Zellman.
One of your stories talked about a radical shift in the way society thinks and feels about firearms and self-defense. And it was called workplace violence and guns. And that's important to a lot of people. So if you could talk about that, because this is an article I think that everyone should get their hands on.
The article you're referring to is another recent cover story called School Shootings, Workplace Violence, and Guns. And like you mentioned, this kind of the main thrust of the article talks about the radical societal shift in the way that just your everyday average person feels about firearms and self-defense. And like most of our writers, the guy that wrote this column, he pulled no punches when it comes to explaining the true deadly consequences when firearms and weapons and self-defense become taboo. Because then essentially what you have are a whole society of people that are afraid of guns and don't know the safety rules of guns. Unfortunately, what happens is that now, instead of the good guys having guns and being familiar with firearms and self-defense, now the only people that are familiar with that are the bad guys. And so it's a situation ripe for trouble. And as I'm sure you can attest to, all of the news stories that we hear about the workplace shootings and the school shootings, that's what happens.
I have a question for you. We had not discussed it previously, but does your association take any position or offer some articles perhaps on how we got into this mess in our society, where there are people who just don't understand or appreciate firearms ownership or who fear guns?
The association doesn't have any documentation or any articles referencing that specifically, but I can certainly give you my position. I think that it's just like all of the ills in our society. It's a problem with previous generations' parents. I mean, who should be teaching children about weapons and firearms and self-defense and freedom is your parents. And my dad taught me about firearms. He taught me about freedom. But there's certainly lots of people my age whose parents never taught them about that. And I personally think that's one of the big problems. And you could probably take it back another generation, and they're the current kids' parents. That's my take on it.
Okay, that works for me. Another article you have here, it's called "But What Do I Tell My Mother?" and Other Vexing Social Questions. I know at JPFO we get calls from people saying, well, what am I going to tell my mother, my aunt, or my uncle about that I'm interested in guns and I believe in self-defense? So maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Sure. That's another popular article that we recently did. And like you mentioned, the article handles the problems that far too many armed citizens, if you will, have to deal with. And that is, what do you tell your loved one, and maybe completely afraid or even against firearms? And if you're in the unfortunate situation that you're actually married to that person, it even gets stickier. But for the most part, most of us, we're talking about our parents or maybe our in-laws, and this is one of those unfortunate things where it's very difficult to deal with, because it's never a logical argument. It's never a logical discussion. It may be logical from your perspective, but the person you're talking to, I pretty much guarantee you that they're going to be nothing but 100% solid emotion. And this article does a great job of ways to handle that and really to. It's the solution is never arguing your way or arguing your point with the person. It's really to try to find out where they're at and go from there.
Yeah, I know from some of the articles in the magazine, it isn't just some of the issues we've been talking about, the people-oriented ones, but also some technical issues like a concise prime run, concealment holsters, or there was one, I think, about should you port or not port your barrel. What other kinds of technical information do you offer? Is it just also gun tests, or is it just a concise article on a specific issue? Or?
Good question. Every issue we have at least one gun review. We kind of have one gun review guy who does all these reviews, and does a great job. And unlike most gun magazines, our gun review guy, actually quite a few times, he's come out and pointed out the negative aspects of a firearm, which doesn't really help us.
Which means you must not be getting free guns from manufacturers.
Well, we don't get free guns, and quite honestly, we don't have too many gun manufacturer advertisers. But that's okay. So there's always a gun review column. And then, like you mentioned, we also usually have at least 2 or 3 very technical articles. We have a few staff writers who are, there's one fellow that I'm thinking of. I bet you the guy owns 200 holsters. And so you have access to this guy's phenomenal knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. And like another, you mentioned the porting article. That's another just a good solid article about what are the positive aspects of porting your barrel for a concealed carry weapon, and what are the negatives. And so yeah, those are great examples of some of the more technical articles that are in the magazine.
Well, out of curiosity, since we just have a few moments, give me a positive and give me a negative for having a ported barrel on your gun.
One positive would be the perceived reduction in recoil. Physically, there's actually no reduction in recoil, but some of the gases escape the top of the barrel, so it feels like it's less. That's definitely one of the positives, and probably the biggest negative is that usually a ported barrel in a concealed carry handgun is going to be on a short barrel revolver. And I actually have one myself, and the muzzle blast is just unbelievable because when you shoot that thing, if you shot it in low light, you wouldn't be able to see for a few minutes. So.
But if you miss, you did get their attention, right?
That's a good point.
Tim, we're kind of winding down here. Is there anything else you want to say?
All I can say is, Aaron, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, and I really respect you and JPFO, your organization. If anybody wants to join the USCCA, I'd be more than happy to have you. You can reach our website at www.uscca.us, or you can call our toll-free number 877-677-1919.
Well, thank you, Tim. In fact, I think if people do contact you, let them know that they heard about you on Talkin to America. I've been your host, Aaron Zellman. This has been Talkin to America. Our guest today has been Tim Schmidt of the United States Concealed Carry Association, also publisher of Concealed Carry Magazine. And I'd like to remind all of you, if you won't defend your rights, don't complain when you lose them.
Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of JPFO.org or its members. Talkin to America is a production of JPFO.org.